Hi, David Taylor or Mr. Pelargonium back with another video blog. Today it's all about cuttings, so keep tuned to find out how to go about doing them. Right, now this video is going to be in two parts. So the first part mostly about zonals with an introduction in general cutting terms, and the second part will be an introduction to regal cuttings, which I do take later in the summer, but there is a bit of an introduction of things that you can do now that you will need to do to your regals in order to get them ready for the late summer cutting period. So in this first part we'll look at mostly at zonal cuttings, which can be taken at any time. This was filmed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, just after the show season, when I had plenty of stock to have a go at. Right, okay, so let's talk cuttings. Now, cuttings are one of the things that I have the biggest number of question marks over on the YouTube channel here. I get lots of queries about cuttings. A lot of people say that they have trouble in sort of keeping them alive or even knowing how to take them. So I'm just going to run through a few quick basics to try to help you just be able to maintain a few. Now, certainly with the zonal types, there should be a very good return on the cuttings. They are relatively easy to do. It's just a few tips to understand when taking them. There is a difference though to taking cuttings with regal plants, because it's a two-phase process. Regals at this time of year, just example, a random one that I'm just picking up here. All that regals want to do in the late spring and early part of summer, is bloom. And what regals do is that they throw separate stems with blooms on. And realistically, what we have to do at this time, sort of late June, when the temperatures are really beginning to level off to be relatively warm, is cut out all of these flower stems and then give the plant about a month or so to really concentrate on getting some good strong growth stems, and then taking cuttings from those in probably about early August. So it's a two-phase process with the regals. Now zonals, on the other hand, they grow and flower on a single stem, so it's much easier. You can take cuttings from zonals really at any time of year. If you're going to provide a bit of warmth, you can take cuttings from them at any time of year. Now, I don't generally take cuttings from my zonals until there's a good bit of warmth in the glass house here to be able to take them. So I will take mine from about now on, from sort of late June, now that the show season's over. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a few cuttings from this plant. This is Mrs. May Last. It always does well for me in the shows, this one, and it grows. Everybody has a plant, every good grower has a plant that always does very well for them, and this one always responds very well for me. It obviously always likes the conditions that I grow them in, and it also likes the watering regime that I undertake, because I never have any issues with this plant whatsoever. This particular one, just back from the show, has got the Best Buy colour. Best Buy colour zonal, or zonal hybrid in this case, because it's a Stella in the show, and it's what you're really looking for in taking cuttings are relatively short jointed stems, and realistically this plant provides many of them. It's not difficult for me to get cuttings off of this plant. Right, clean knife as always, and I'm just going to take a couple off here just to show you what I'm doing now. I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this. Under here there's a nice short jointed stem break cutting off a stem. So I'm just literally going to cut that off. Now this plant in itself is about 6 years old, and it's very debatable as to whether I'm actually going to carry on actually taking cuttings from it. Sorry, actually, whether I'm going to continue to use it for show. I'm not taking cuttings from it, there's loads of them on here. But yeah, it's a bit of a debatable one. And I don't know, it is getting a little bit woody at the base. So this is what happens when you get a show plant that gets very woody. You start getting gaps in the growth around the base of the plant, and that means that it probably is just starting to get a little bit old. It's about 6-7 years old, this plant. And many novice growers that we had at the show this year always say, what's the key thing with growing plants for show? And I said the majority of more novice growers or inexperienced growers will be showing plants that are just far too young. They think they're getting the best out of the plant, say in a year old, sometimes two, but more often than not, most of the experienced growers are using plants that are at least 2 years old, and that's the youngest that they would use. And more often than not, they're showing plants that are very old, sometimes up to 10 years. So it's just shows you the difference that it can make. Okay, now with this, hopefully you may be able to sort of pick this up, but this is perfect cutting material because it's nice and round. There's loads and loads of growth on it. Now, because I've got the little stem like that, we need to get a little bit of depth to the stem to put in the compost. So I'm just going to take a couple of leaves off there to get a bit of height to the stem, and there's one little side shoot growing out about 1 centimetre from the bottom. So I'm actually going to take that one off because you need probably at least 2 centimetres of stem that you're going to put in the little compost pot. But that's it really. Now we talk about short jointed, using short jointed stems for cuttings, and this, because it is a dwarf plant, this is why the smaller the plant, generally on the zonal side that is, the smaller the plant, the more short jointed it will naturally be. And what you want to do is, if you've got, there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 rings on there, so that's the joints. So that's really short jointed on about 2 centimetres. So, you know, I just cut that just below a node, one of the joints, and that's what you need to do. You need to take it just below one of the little joints there. But with the smaller plants, when you get a lot of joints or a lot of nodes, you know, any cut will always be just below a joint or a node. So you can't go wrong with it really. So it's worth, you know, thinking about where you take the plants, but where you take your cuttings. So that one's just below a joint. I'm just tidying up, nice and straight. Of course, I've cleaned this, sterilise your knife before you do that. But that is the perfect cutting. Now, what I will do with that now, I will leave that. It's actually a duller, and it is actually raining at the moment, although it's quite warm. And I will leave that now just to seal off. So leave it about 15 minutes and it will just seal off, and that'll be perfect. That'll just seal that. It won't come to any harm. Don't worry if your leaves just wilt a little bit. They shouldn't do really if you've got a wood that's relatively green but is relatively firm. That's another sort of thing that you're looking for with your cuttings. You want them firm, but you want them relatively green. Zonals indeed, you know, if they're in the shade deep in the plant, they will even begin to throw a little bit of root in the base of the plant. So, you know, you can quite easily use those for cutting material. But that one's fine. So that just needs to be left to just seal off. Right, now zonals do not actually need any kind of sort of rooting hormone powder or anything like that. They root very freely, and you do not need it. You do not need it for zonals or zonal hybrids. The only time that you do need a bit of the hormone rooting or a fungal sealant is with regals, and we'll talk about those later in the summer, as I've already spoken about. Okay, so let's get on to the mix that I use. I use basically a very light mix. It's 50-50 of a standard light sort of general purpose compost and fine perlite. You can get a finer perlite, but sharp sand would be good. Anything that creates a lot of drainage within the little mix that you've done here. Right, and I use specific little pots, individual little pots that I just fill up with this mix, and I just press it down. You can firm it down relatively well, just so that it's, you know, it's just sort of sitting firm. Right, and once they've sealed, you can just get something to just stab the end, just to make a guide for the cutting to go into. They're quite tough, and it's just a question of pushing it in, pushing it down, firming it round, and there we are. That's what I do. That's all I do. They've gone in there. That's quite easy. That's going to hopefully make a very good little plant. Get your label, stick that in the side. Now what I will do now, I will put that in a little pool of water, just a little saucer of water to take up some moisture. Now, the thing is, I will watch that. I will put it in the moisture just to watch the surface of this little compost just begin to darken with absorbing the moisture, and I will then take it out straight away. You want to keep your cuttings under a bench. I've got some of my new cuttings under a bench here, so it's pretty dark, or certainly duller. It's light, but it's not totally dark, but just keeps them out the sun. They don't want too much shock in the first few days of being taken. But one of the things that I think a lot of mistakes that people make is that they overwater them. Don't be afraid to let these dry out a little bit between watering, and that's a key one. I think a lot of people, they tend to overwater them, and pelargoniums, they don't like to be enclosed. Certainly don't put them in a propagator. I've seen people put them in a propagator like fuchsias and things like that like a lot of humidity when the cuttings are being taken. Pelargoniums do not like humidity. So keep them open. They do not need to be covered. As long as it's warm enough, and you're probably needing a minimum of sort of 14-15 degrees at night, which we will get realistically from now on in the UK. They do not want to be covered, so don't get them over moist, and don't be afraid to just let the surface of this compost dry out before you take it out and stand it in a saucer again. So I always let mine sort of dry out almost to the base before I water them again. So when taking up water in a saucer now, they won't need anything doing with them for 3, 4, 5 days, depending on how warm it gets. It's meant to be getting pretty warm here in the UK over the next few days. So that's really it as far as the zonals go.